Good morning, gardening friends. This is Anna at Unity Church-Unitarian. Long ago, a wise man, King Solomon, is said to have spoken words that sound something like this. For everything there is a season. There's a time to reap, a time to sow, a time to live, a time to die, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance. As we live through these confusing times, this time of change, I remind myself that where there is darkness, there will be light. We will laugh and dance again. Let us light our chalice. I light this chalice as a symbol of our faith, the light of truth and the warmth of love. So, there have been a lot of joys and sorrows in our lives this week. I helped a friend last week. She is in a wheelchair and can't garden very well, but she wanted to grow a few tomatoes. And I went over to her house and dug in the dirt and worked in some soil amendments, and we planted tomatoes. And it made me happy to be with her and to see the joy on her face as a result of our work together. So that was a joy. So I'll give you a chance to do this at home, do your own joys and sorrows. You can do it with stones, or you can just simply do it in your heart. To everything there is a season, a time to sow. Sow in this sense is spelled S-O-W. It's not the sewing that you do with fabric in a sewing machine. It's what people have done for thousands and thousands of years when they grew grain. And they would take a basket or a bag and they would put their hand in the seed and scatter it across the freshly turned soil. And that was sowing. There's always an element of faith that those seeds will grow and the rain will come and the plants will grow and you will have wheat and you will have grain, and then you can make bread and feed yourself. But that's what King Solomon meant when he said sowing. And my thinking this week has turned to our garden and a question that every gardener faces in the spring. How do we know when it's time to plant, when it's time to sow? This year was a funny spring. It was really, really slow to come. We had some warm weather, and I planted my corn and my lettuce and my beets and my onions at home. And they sprouted, and then it got really cold for 2 weeks. I covered my plants with plastic, and they didn't die, but they didn't grow either because the temperature just wasn't right. They started growing later, and I'm eating that lettuce at home now. But what is it that makes some plants grow when it's cold and other plants don't? So this is a question for science, and what we have found is that there are different plants that do different things. There are some, if you look at lettuce, it can be planted in a temperature as low as 35 degrees. It grows best if it's at least 45 degrees, but it'll sprout even up to 80 degrees, and that's a pretty wide range. If we look at something like pumpkins need for it to be 75 degrees in the soil for them to even start to grow, and they can handle temperatures up to 100 degrees. So plants are different, and the gardener has to kind of know that. The Native Americans used to say, because they watched the land around them, they used to say that it's time to plant the corn when the oak leaves are the size of a mouse's ear. So think about that. The buds are inside, the leaves are inside the bud on the end of that branch. And when they first open up, they get to be the size of a mouse's ear. And that means that it's warm enough for the oak trees to start growing, so it's the right temperature for the corn too. We have a book that's called Up in the Garden and Down in the Dirt.
Up in the Garden and Down in the Dirt by Kate Messner with art by Christopher Silas Neal. Up in the garden I stand and plan, my hands full of seeds and my head full of dreams. Spring sun shines down to melt the sleepy snow. Wind whistles through last year's plants, and mud sucks at my rain boots. It's not quite time, Nana says. Down in the dirt, things need to dry out and warm up. What's down there, I ask. Down in the dirt is a whole busy world of earthworms and insects, digging and building and stirring up soil. They're already working down in the dirt. Up in the garden, we snap brittle stalks, scoop rusty armfuls, and wheel away weeds for the chickens. While they squabble and scratch, we spread compost over the soil. Down in the dirt, pill bugs chew through last year's leaves. I give a gentle poke. They roll up tight and hide in plated suits of armor, roly-poly round. Up in the garden, it's time to plant. I trail a furrow with my finger and sprinkle seeds in a careful row. Give them a drink, Nana says. We pat them down to snuggle in the dark. Down in the dirt, a tomato hornworm rests, waiting for wings, and the leaves where she'll lay her eggs. Up in the garden, carrot plants sprout, pea blossoms bloom, wasps are on the prowl, and honeybees visit, legs loaded with pollen. I weed and wilt in sun so strong, even Nana looks for shade. Down in the dirt, earthworms tunnel deep. I'm jealous of their cool, damp dark. Up in the garden, rain shower. Nana turns the hose on me. Eee! I hide behind the cucumber vines, but their leaves can't save me. I shiver and laugh, drenched in Nana's rain. Down in the dirt, water soaks deep. Roots drink it in, and the long-legged spider stilt walks over the streams. Up in the garden, there's so much to eat. Ladybugs feast on aphids. Nana crunches green beans. I bite a ripe tomato, warm from the sun. Juice dribbles down my chin. Down in the dirt, a robin's beak finds a cricket, a beetle, a grub. Slugs are scrumptious, too. Up in the garden, a praying mantis wakes to hunt mosquitoes. Nana sprays away the aphids, and I'm after grasshoppers. Ready to swoosh, but snap! Someone else is faster. Down in the dirt, a smooth, shining garter snake crunches on supper. Up in the garden, the wind grows cool. Pumpkins blush orange, and sunflowers bow to September. Nana ties them together to build a house for reading. Down in the dirt, an orb weaver spins her web, strand by silken strand. She'll munch on moths tonight. Up in the garden, colored leaves litter the squash vines, and we know the cold is coming. Hurry, hurry, and harvest. There's enough for the neighbors, too. Down in the dirt, frantic ants gather what we leave behind. They're storing food for cooler days ahead. Up in the garden, frost draws lace on leftover leaves, where secret egg sacs hang, waiting for the warm to return. We say goodbye and spread the winter blankets. Down in the dirt, beetles burrow. Ants scurry home. Earthworms curl tight in the dark. When Grandpa calls us in for soup, an autumn moon is rising. Up in the garden, dry cornstalks tremble, and the wind smells like winter. But the long, ripe days of summer still rest in the garden days. The ladybugs and bumblebees, earthworms and ants are hunkered down, hiding, biding their time, dreaming of sunshine and blossoms and sprouts. Under the bare arms of trees and the blanketing snow, a whole new garden sleeps down in the dirt.
I have a friend, Kathy, who has been growing prairie plants, and those plants will go into our pollinator garden in another week or two. And prairie plants do something different again. They're formed in the summer and the fall, and they fall to the ground, but if they were to sprout right away, the little baby plants would die in the winter. So their seeds have a particularly hard seed coat, and something needs to happen for that seed coat to finally wear away and break, and that happens by the springtime. So some of these seeds get rolled around, sometimes for years, in sandy soil, and that rubs it off. The ones Kathy was growing are ones that soak up the water and freeze and thaw, and freeze and thaw, and freeze and thaw. And that happens a whole bunch in the fall, in the winter, in the spring, and then finally those seeds sprout. And then there are little plants that are about this big, and we'll be putting them in the garden. So prairie plants have their own adaptations. What about animals? If I think about birds, so many of our birds spent our winter down in Mexico, South America, faraway places. How do they know when it's time to come back? Well, part of it is the temperature. Part of it is the wind, the weathers. Many of the birds will migrate when there's a storm because they either follow the storm or move ahead of it because then the winds are blowing the right direction. But what scientists have found is that it's the light and the change in the light that triggers the changes in the bird's body. So we know that in the spring, the days get longer, and then the fall, they get shorter. And the bird's body adapts to that. They feed a lot, they put on fat stores, and then when the weather's just right, boom, they'll fly 1,000 miles in a night. It's just amazing. One of the things I love about being in the garden is that I see these changes, these seasons. I see when the first plants come up, and I watch them grow, and I watch them flower and produce seed. I can hear the bluebird on my fence post when it starts to sing after it's first come back from southern U.S. The monarchs are back. I've been seeing dragonflies. Those things just make me really happy. And particularly when we're living through dark times, when I go into the garden, I know that day will follow night. I know it will rain again. I know the seasons will come, and there's a tremendous comfort in that. People who study this, we call this phenology, people who study this keep records, and each year they write down when the first bluebird comes, or when the first dragonfly comes, or when the first mosquito comes out, and they write down what they observe about the plants. If you wanted to be a phenologist, you would choose something to look at and study and watch how it changes through time, maybe in the course of a day, maybe in the course of a week, and possibly through the whole season. KP recently has been talking about how hard it is to understand the whole when it is really, really big and complicated. But if you can take something, a little piece of that whole, and study that, sometimes that's more manageable and it's a lot of fun. I have a couple tools that you could use for this. If you've got an old picture frame, you can decorate it if you want. Any kind of a frame will work, but it needs to be sort of small. Alternatively, if you've got construction paper, I made one out of construction paper and decorated the edges. And this one you could tape onto a window, and every morning you look at that and you see like those onions that are over there. I could see that. I watch them as they bloom. This morning there was a dragonfly perched on the end of it, so it changes a little bit every day. And then you can write that down. On the parent resource page, I do have a link to the Minnesota Phenology Network, and they have a lot of tips on how to do this. You can submit sightings and observations to them. If you have the more solid frame, you can pick a spot in the garden and leave it there. For instance, here I've got grass that is blooming, and I've got dandelion that is there, and a little bit of clover. And I'm just wondering, how will that should be different tomorrow or next week? The only catch is make sure you color it brightly so that it doesn't get mowed and damaged at home. So make sure your parents know what you're doing. But that's the study of phenology. And I would encourage all of you to do a little bit of that this week and have fun with it. So I think we will extinguish our flame. Thank you all for joining me today. It's been fun to be in the garden with you. And as we come to the end of our time and extinguish this flame, we know that the light of truth and the warmth of love go with us in our heart. Have a wonderful week.